Hello there, students. Welcome to the November 11th study session. I want to congratulate everyone on their performance on the midterm examination. We're going to actually use this session to review some key concepts that are very important. And remember that the midterm examination study guide, which is presented here, is a vocabulary list of the key terms that you really need to learn, particularly in the first half of the course. They will really help you with your research design. And some of the things that we have been studying, we pull from other resources. A lot of them come from the Cook, Campbell, and Shadish book, Experimental and Quasi-Experimental Designs for Generalized Causal Inference. And they have a wonderful first chapter that really starts to pull out cause and effect and causal relationship. So first, it's important to understand what is the difference between cause and effect. But first, it's even more important to go back to understanding the type of variables that research design, particularly in the social sciences, examines. One of the first ones is an independent variable, also known as the X. It can also be referred to as the cause, or the variable that directly affects the outcome, or the dependent variable. And it's very important to remember that the independent can occur on its own. It doesn't need to exist or be dependent on another variable, and it is just as it is. However, the dependent variable, which is the second type of variable that we often look at, is known as the Y. And this is the outcome or the effect or the change that was prompted. It really is the effect, whereas the first one is the cause. But these variables are different, but sometimes we can mistake one variable as being the X and then assume that the other is the Y. And we have to be very careful when establishing what we call a causal relationship. The relationship between the X and the Y, or the independent and dependent variables. It's important to remember that a causal relationship can only exist if first the cause precedes the effect. So the cause must happen first, and then there's a change, and that change is the measured effect. 2, the cause was related to the effect. So something happened because of something else. They were completely relatable, we know that for sure. And 3, we can find no plausible alternative explanation for the effect other than the cause. So that's pretty important to realize, and these can be theoretically hard to understand, but we'll start to do that. To remind students is just because you're studying two variables that are occurring or have a relationship together does not necessarily mean that they're a causal relationship. They may be simply correlated. And correlation is a statistical term. Many of you have not yet taken statistics, but this class will start to prepare you for your statistics courses by introducing these concepts. And correlation really refers to how much two or more variables relate to one another or are associated. And they can be positively associated, meaning that as one increases, the other one decreases, or they increase and decrease at the same time, which can be both positive and negative correlations. And it's very, very important to remember that Shadish, Cook, and Campbell remind us that correlation does not necessarily mean causation or a cause and effect relationship between variables, only that they are related statistically. And this is very important to understand. For example, it is commonly known in educational research that there is a strong correlation between sending young girls to school and preventing early marriage or early pregnancy. If a girl goes to school, she is also less likely to get married young or to marry later. But which is the X and which is the Y, or are they happening congruently? There is conflicting research that concludes one is an X and one is a Y, when others actually say that they're correlated and that neither is the X or the Y. One does not precede the other. They happen at the same time. For example, a family chooses to educate their daughter and at the same time makes the decision to not have her married young. So again, this is where experimentation and research designs can really help understand if a relationship between two variables is simply a correlation or is it a cause and effect relationship. So it will be very important for you to understand what an experiment is and the different types of experiments that exist. And one of the great resources that's offered by Shadish, Cook, and Campbell are the definitions on the different types of experiments and research that exist in the social sciences. An experiment is a study in which an intervention is deliberately introduced by you, the researcher, to observe its effects. The test will control for conditions and is made to demonstrate a known truth. It examines the validity of your hypothesis and it determines how well you actually are understanding the relationship between the variables. And it's important to know that there are randomized experiments, quasi-experiments, which are experiments in which units are not assigned to conditions of randomized selection, natural experiments, often when you go observe something in its natural state and are not introducing a catalyst for change or treatment. You're not withholding. And then there's also just correlation study. It's important for you to get to know these different types of experiments and then to really think about how those are going to affect what we are going to call your study design, in which you'll decide if you're doing a natural, a quasi, or a randomized experiment. With that in mind, I encourage you to please reread chapters 1 and 2 of Shadish, Cook, and Campbell, and to, if anything, use the midterm study guide to really learn the basic tenets of research design. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me this week.